All right, everybody, welcome back to Hawk Droppings with me, Hawk. Today is Wednesday, June 26th. I'm recording this at about 3 p.m. West Coast time. We are going to talk today about Donald Trump's immunity claims. We got a couple of more opinions from the court today. The immunity ruling was not among them. So we're going to talk about the arguments that happened in front of the Supreme Court on that issue. We're going to talk about what to look for in this decision, and we're going to talk about the impact that this decision could have on Donald Trump's criminal cases. And I think it's been 10 days since I've recorded anything, so I apologize to you guys for that. I've had COVID last week, and right now I am dealing with fairly debilitating aftermath of that with post-COVID fatigue. And but I've been kind of going nuts wanting to record something. So, and I'm sure you guys have been growing a bit impatient as well. So I apologize for that. Let's just dive in and see how this goes. Hopefully I can make it through an entire episode without falling over and passing out. So Donald Trump first filed in the criminal case in Washington, D.C., the January 6th efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Donald Trump first filed a motion to dismiss that case on grounds of presidential immunity, I think last November, something like that. And Judge Tanya Chutkan, she had a hearing, pretty quickly turned out a decision, a very eloquently written decision, a very, very well written judicial opinion. I highly recommend that everybody read that. Hang on one second. I'm just making a note to myself. I'm going to send a link to that opinion to my brother when he does the final show notes for this episode so that can be linked in the show notes so that you guys can see it. It's not super long. It's very readable. It's very clear. It's very concise, and it's extremely well written and very well reasoned, and very forcefully shoots down Donald Trump's claims for immunity from criminal prosecution for acts that he committed while he was in office as president of the United States. He appealed her decision to the D.C. Circuit Court, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, and they turned it around very quickly and similarly shot down all of Donald Trump's claims in an opinion that basically mirrored the one that was written by Judge Tanya Chutkan at the trial court level. He appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and amazingly, on February 28th, the U.S. Supreme Court accepted the case, placed a stay on the lower court. They did that on February 28th, and they scheduled oral argument for April 25th, 2 months later, which is ridiculous, and built in a 2-month delay that did nothing other than completely benefit Donald Trump. And now here we are 2 months after oral argument on June 26th, almost 2 months exactly. So it's been 4 months since the Supreme Court accepted the case, and we still don't have a decision. Today's Wednesday, the 26th. I expect everybody is kind of expecting that we'll have this decision by Friday, but there's no rule, there's no statute, there's no requirement that the Supreme Court get all of their decisions for a term released to the public by the end of the court's term, which ends on June 30th. That requirement doesn't exist. So it could be, we could get it on Friday, or it could be another 2, 3, 4 weeks before we get this decision. It just depends. It depends on the court's conservatives, frankly. It depends on the court's conservatives. So when the court held oral argument on April 25th of this year, what were the arguments? What was Trump's ask? What was he trying to get? What were the judges focusing on? What kinds of questions were they asking? And, the 5 conservative men on the court, Roberts, Thomas, Alito, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, the oral argument was very striking and disturbing from them because they seemed to be much more offended by the fact that Donald Trump was being prosecuted at all, rather than the fact that he was asking for immunity from such prosecution. Their attitudes, their tone, their questions, the way they treated the attorney who was arguing the case for Jack Smith, it was bizarre. I mean, it was just something from a completely different universe. But, is what it is. But the court focused on delineating between acts committed by a president while he's in office, differentiating between acts which were official acts in furtherance of the office of the presidency versus personal acts, acts engaged in for purely personal benefit. And, I often, people sometimes ask me questions. They're like, huh? And I'm like, well, just think about this. When Bill Clinton was in office and got a blowjob in that room off of the Oval Office, that was not an official act in furtherance of the office of the presidency. That was an act that was purely for his personal benefit. And I think in Trump's criminal cases, we get both. And I'm going to explain that in a minute. But at no point am I going to be describing Donald Trump getting a blowjob. So you can spare yourselves that disturbing mental image. The judges on the court were skeptical in a lot of ways of both sides. Donald Trump's attorney was a guy named John Sauer, and Clarence Thomas, who for decades never said a word during oral argument. He started off with the first question saying, what define what constitutes official acts of the presidency. And, there was a discussion about like assassinations and ordering assassinations of political opponents and shit like that. I mean, John Sauer in these arguments just got silly and ridiculous. Elena Kagan was like, can a president order a military coup? Is that an official act? Justice Sonia Sotomayor, if the president decides that a rival is a corrupt person, he orders the military to assassinate that political rival. Is that an official act for which he can get immunity? Of the conservatives, the one who was actually sane during this hearing was Amy Coney Barrett. And she keyed into a specific act from Jack Smith's indictment of Donald Trump. Trump conspired with another attorney who caused the filing in court of a verification for a complaint that had been signed by Trump that contained false allegations to support the challenge, which Donald Trump knew they were false at the time. Is that private? And Trump's attorney was like, yeah, that sounds private. That sounds to be of private benefit. Which I thought that was fantastic because that was a fact. That was an act, a presidential act directly from Jack Smith's indictment. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute here. Let's see. And one of the main arguments that Trump's attorneys were making was that presidents are immune unless they are impeached and removed from office for that act while they're still in office, which, I guess gives every president a pass during the last 2 months of his presidency because there's not time to impeach somebody in that time frame. And Trump's attorneys have consistently argued that presidents should have absolute immunity, period, for anything and everything they do while in office. And Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson during questioning, asked Trump's attorney, she's like, so then why did President Ford feel the need to pardon President Nixon? If presidents are immune, why was President Nixon ever in danger of being criminally prosecuted? I thought that was a good question, too. And, you know, so the court still has 12 decisions to get out. I mean, they got this Chevron decision to get out. They apparently leaked the Idaho abortion case decision today, which seems like it's going to have a good result. There's another January 6th case that's pending on the constitutionality of an obstruction charge that almost every single one of the J6 defendants has been charged with and prosecuted under. There are a lot of cases that are still pending. They've got 12 left and, you know, basically 2 days to get those out, Thursday and Friday. So we'll see. We'll see what they're going to do. As bad as the oral arguments were, I really, and I think most experts agree with this, there aren't 5 votes on the court to give Trump total blanket immunity for everything. Those votes don't exist. I don't think even Alito or Thomas are going to go that far, although it's going to be fascinating when this opinion comes out to see what they've written within that document. And it's going to be shitty and dumb, I guarantee you. Sorry. I'm feeling a little punchy today. So another really good question from Ketanji Brown Jackson during oral arguments is like, she was like, I'm trying to understand what you're proposing is the disincentive from a president turning the Oval Office into just the seat of criminal activity in this country. And Trump's team didn't really have a good answer for that. They just went back to, well, you got to go to impeachment. You got to go to impeachment. And remember, during Trump's second impeachment trial, when he was impeached for January 6th, his attorneys argued the exact opposite. You don't have to impeach him and convict him because we have a criminal justice system. We have a civil justice system. And, arguing that Trump is criminally liable for prosecution for the things that he did leading up to January 6th. Well, now that he's being prosecuted for those things, they're arguing the exact opposite. You can't prosecute him unless you've impeached him and removed him from office, which was not lost on at least the court's liberal justices. But so how did this case get to the Supreme Court? Well, first we had a decision that was written by Judge Tanya Chutkan, and I'll put the link to that in the case notes, or my brother will. And part of what she wrote was, whatever immunities a sitting president may enjoy, the United States has only one chief executive at a time, and that position does not confer a lifelong get-out-of-jail-free pass. Former presidents enjoy no special condition on their federal criminal liability. Defendant's 4-year service as commander-in-chief did not bestow on him the divine right of kings to evade the criminal accountability that governs his fellow citizens. Boom. It's such a great opinion to read. And so I think here's what I think is most likely. The court's not going to give Trump blanket immunity from criminal prosecution. Pardon me for 1 second. They're just not going to do that. The votes aren't there for that. It does seem to me like they're going to focus on this distinction of acts committed in office that are official acts versus acts for personal benefit. I don't know. I was talking to Legal Dad about this the other day. I don't know if they're going to come up with, some kind of silly test with 5 prongs to it or whatever. I mean, this court doesn't like those kind of tests. The conservatives hate those kinds of tests. But they're likely to do something that is going to kick it down to the trial court again to make some further determinations regarding the facts that are pled in the D.C. indictment for Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Now, another thing, I'm almost less concerned about what the Supreme Court actually does. I'm much more focused right now on Jack Smith and Judge Tanya Chutkan. I guarantee you both of them are preparing all kinds of, they're preparing for all kinds of potential outcomes in this decision, especially Jack Smith. And so we're going to turn now and talk about the indictment itself, the J6 indictment itself. He has discretion as a prosecutor. He can pull certain facts out of the indictment. He can pull certain counts out of the indictment. There are 4 counts. But before we get to that, let's talk about the other 3 criminal cases, and will this decision have an impact on the other 3 criminal cases? The Manhattan election interference case has already been decided and focused largely on acts committed before Donald Trump took office, even though he wrote the reimbursement checks to Cohen while he was in office. Those are not official acts of the presidency. So that case, I think, will be unaffected by whatever this court's decision is. The Mar-a-Lago classified documents case will be unaffected by whatever decisions are made in this case, because the obstruction charges, those facts occurred when Trump was out of office. He retained these documents while he was out of office. He's not charged with stealing them. He's charged with keeping them beyond when he was entitled to do so. And beyond when he was entitled to do so, by definition, is after he left office. So the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case will not be affected by the decision in this immunity case. The Fulton County RICO case with Fani Willis. I mean, it's Trump and 18 co-defendants, 4 of whom have already pled guilty to felonies. It's a very similar fact pattern to Jack Smith's indictment, with fake electors and acts committed while he was in office. So that case very well could be affected by this decision as it relates to Donald Trump only. The other 18 co-defendants are not going to enjoy any kind of presidential immunity, assuming that the court finds there to be some. So their cases will be unaffected. But Donald Trump, Fani Willis may need to amend her indictment in that case as well, as it relates to Trump. The primary case that could be affected is the case in which Donald Trump's original appeal for immunity was made. His original motion to dismiss on the grounds of presidential immunity. And that's the Washington, D.C. case for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. That indictment has 4 counts: conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights. The 4th count, the conspiracy against rights, is basically conspiring to disenfranchise the 81 million people who voted for Joe Biden, throw their votes out, in effect, and make Trump president, even though 81 million people voted for Joe Biden. So I'm going to start this off just so we get a refresher. I'm going to read the first couple of pages of this indictment. And again, I'll put a link to this one in the show, in the episode notes as well. Excuse me. COVID has wrecked my body right now. About 90% of my symptoms are gone. It's like I still have a little congestion, and the fatigue and just the exhaustion and the full body aches and pains are just absolutely debilitating right now, even though I've been testing negative for the past 5 days. So I expect this is going to hang out for a little bit. All right. 1. The defendant, Donald Trump, was the 45th president of the United States and a candidate for re-election in 2020. The defendant lost the 2020 presidential election. 2. Despite having lost, the defendant was determined to remain in power. So for more than 2 months following Election Day on November 3rd, 2020, the defendant spread lies that there had been outcome determinative fraud in the election and that he had actually won. These claims were false, and the defendant knew they were false. Defendant is Trump, obviously. But the defendant repeated and widely disseminated them anyway to make his knowingly false claims appear legitimate, create an intense national atmosphere of mistrust and anger, and erode public faith in the administration of the election. The defendant had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election. I'm going to skip a couple things. He was also entitled to formally challenge the results of the election through lawful and appropriate means. Indeed, in many cases, the defendant did pursue these methods of contesting the election results. His efforts to change the outcome in any state through recounts, audits, or legal challenges were uniformly unsuccessful. 4. Shortly after Election Day, the defendant also pursued unlawful means of discounting legitimate votes and subverting the election results. In so doing, the defendant perpetrated 3 criminal conspiracies. A. Conspiracy to defraud the United States by using dishonesty, fraud, deceit to impair, obstruct, and defeat the lawful government function of collecting, counting ballots in violation of 18 U.S.C. 371. B. A conspiracy to corruptly obstruct and impede the January 6th congressional proceeding at which the collected results of the presidential election are counted and certified in violation of 18 U.S.C. 1512 subsection K. C. A conspiracy against the right to vote and to have one's vote counted in violation of 18 U.S.C. section 241. Each of these conspiracies, which built on the widespread mistrust of the defendant, or the mistrust the defendant was created through pervasive and destabilizing lies about election fraud, targeted a bedrock function of the United States government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. So that's kind of the intro. And so this indictment is 45 pages long. Count 1 is 40 pages long because it includes all of the facts. And then when we get to count 2, count 3, and count 4, those counts simply reincorporate all of the facts that were included in the section for count 1. All right, count 1, conspiracy to defraud the United States. 6, from on or about November 14th through on or about January 20th, 2021, in the District of Columbia and elsewhere, the defendant, Donald J. Trump, did knowingly combine, conspire, confederate, and agree with co-conspirators, known and unknown, to the grand jury to defraud the United States by using dishonesty, fraud, and deceit to impair, obstruct, and defeat the lawful federal government function by which the results of the presidential election are collected, counted, and certified by the federal government. 7, the purpose of the conspiracy was to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 presidential election by using knowingly false claims of election fraud to obstruct the federal government function by which those results are collected, counted, and certified. Now we get down to the co-conspirators. There are 6 unindicted co-conspirators in this case, people who helped him in these efforts. All of them are attorneys. Rudy Giuliani is co-conspirator number 1. John Eastman is co-conspirator number 2. Sidney Powell, release the Kraken, is co-conspirator number 3. The DOJ environmental attorney Jeffrey Clark is co-conspirator 4. Little Kenny Cheesebro is co-conspirator number 5. And Boris Epstein is co-conspirator number 6. So that kind of introduction and that first part of count 1 gives us the overview of what the case is about. And then in conjunction with this immunity decision that we're going to get from the Supreme Court, hopefully by Friday, it's a matter of going through this indictment and all of the acts that are alleged against Donald Trump, that acts that he engaged in, things that he did, said, ordered, whatever. It's a question of determining whether or not those actions were official acts in furtherance of the office of the presidency or within the rights of a president, or if those acts were committed purely for personal benefit or personal gain. And so we're going to cover a few of these. Overarching, I'll say it this way. There were some things that Donald Trump did, some specific actual acts that he took that I think can very easily be interpreted as official acts. But the overarching scheme of this whole thing was of personal benefit to Donald Trump in trying to keep him in office. That's a personal benefit to Donald Trump. That's not an official act. Trying to overturn an election so that you can stay in office is a personal benefit. But there were acts that he committed along the way that I think were official acts. And we're going to talk about a couple of those. But there's a section, the next section on page 5, starting with paragraph 10, is called Manner and Means. The defendant's conspiracy to defeat the government function through blah, 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 included the following manner and means. And he talks about making false claims of election fraud to get state legislators and election officials in various states to subvert the legitimate election results. Because he and his people were calling legislators in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, and telling like state level legislators, hey man, you guys got to overturn this. You got to reconvene your state legislature, throw out the slate of electors that was duly elected and replace them with Trump electors. And in the next step to that was the defendant and co-conspirators organized fraudulent slates of electors in 7 targeted states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, attempting to mimic the procedures that the legitimate electors were supposed to follow. So again, it's like you're doing these things which look like official acts. You're following the same rules that the actual electors follow in selecting your fake electors, but it's all for personal benefit. These are not official acts of the president. Defendant and co-conspirators attempted to use the power and authority of the Justice Department to conduct sham election crime investigations at the state level. So let's talk about this one for a second. Bill Barr had resigned in December of 2020. And Donald Trump replaced him with an acting attorney general and an acting deputy attorney general. I can't remember their names. One of them was named Donahue. And those two guys stood up against Donald Trump, along with Pat Cipollone and other attorneys in the White House counsel's office, including Eric Hirschman. One allegation that has been made is that Donald Trump has said, and so there was a Pennsylvania congressman named Scott Perry who put Donald Trump and Mark Meadows in touch with an attorney at the Department of Justice who headed the environmental division, a guy named Jeffrey Clark, and was like, he said, this guy, Jeff Clark, he'll play ball. He'll do what you guys want to do. He will send letters to all these various states on DOJ letterhead saying there's been massive fraud. We need to investigate. Don't certify your slates of electors. Whereas the current acting attorney general and acting deputy attorney general was like, we're not doing that. There's no evidence to support this. Scott Perry told Donald Trump and Mark Meadows, this guy, Jeffrey Clark, will do that. He'll do that for you. Now, here's an example of what I was talking about that is an official act, but mainly for personal benefit, but it's still an official act. The positions of Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General are part of the executive branch. The president has the power to fire these people, regardless of why. Richard Nixon fired a special counsel who was investigating him during Watergate. And he just did it. That's an official act. It might not be for the proper motive, or it might be for some nefarious benefit, but that's an official act. And so I think that what we need to look out for when this decision comes out is it structured in a way that allows the case to move forward in an expeditious manner? Is this decision going to be structured in a way that Jack Smith simply has the ability to file an amended indictment with the court, pulling out 1 or 2 counts or pulling out a dozen or 24 facts from the indictment and say, we've modified the indictment, we're ready to proceed on this indictment in its current form, which is consistent with the order that we just got from the Supreme Court. We'd like a trial date in mid-August or something like that. And that's what I'm going to be looking for. Or is it going to be structured in a way that requires Judge Tanya Chutkan to make these determinations before a trial goes forward, which Jack Smith could still do that. He could take the heat off of Judge Tanya Chutkan if she's required by the Supreme Court to do all these kinds of things and make these determinations about specific acts alleged in the indictment. You know, the Supreme Court could issue an opinion requiring her to do all kinds of things, and Jack Smith could respond to that by saying, let me take the heat off of you, Your Honor. Here's our amended indictment that pulls out all of the facts that are arguably for personal the benefit of the office of the presidency itself, that are official acts, leaving in only acts that are for personal benefit. And there are plenty of those. Almost the entire, 85% of the actions that are alleged in this indictment are purely for Donald Trump's personal benefit. And so I don't think even this Supreme Court is going to be able to issue an order that by itself will prevent this case from going to trial before Election Day. I believe that we're going to see a trial in the January 6th case in Washington, D.C. before Election Day, whether it's in, September or start date of sometime during September is what I think is going to happen, because that gives everybody all of July and all of August to get their ducks in a row. And Judge Tanya Chutkan is a no bullshit judge. She's very, very similar to Judge Juan Merchan in Manhattan in the criminal trial that we just saw wrap up about 3 weeks ago. And 2 other things to consider in that wheelhouse. She had originally calendared this trial to go forward on March 4th of this year. Almost 4 months ago. She had put the expectation on the parties to be ready to go to trial on March 4th of this year. Second thing, every bit, all of the delay that has come since December in this case, when Donald Trump started appealing this stuff and first filed his motion to dismiss based on immunity grounds, all of the delay that has happened is because of Donald Trump, 100%, period. And that is likely to have some impact on Judge Chutkan's decision as far as when to calendar a trial in this case. So I'm still hopeful that we will see a trial in this case before Election Day. I think the American people, a very significant majority of the American people, want to see a verdict in this case, one way or the other, before Election Day. And I think that's the responsible thing for the court to do in this case. I think Judge Tanya Chutkin is aware that that is the responsible thing for her to do, although I do not for 1 second believe that that will be determinative of her decision on when to schedule trial in this case. All right, we're at about 35 minutes, and I am about ready to fall over and pass out. So I hope I was not in any way incoherent during this episode. It feels good to record another episode again. It's been about 10 days since I've done that. But I should also mention last few days of Pride Month, we are doing our Pride merch promo at our merch store, hawkmerchstore.com. Please go check that out. We've got a huge line of Pride merch. We the People includes everyone. Pride merch with amazing graphics by our buddy Wiseacre. The design was by me, and all the products were basically hand-selected by my brother, and he's responsible for building and running our merch store website. And for the month of June, we're donating all of our proceeds from the sale of these items to a nonprofit called Kaleidoscope Youth Center. It's located in Columbus, Ohio, and they provide all kinds of support and services for LGBTQ youth. Even though they're in Columbus, Ohio, which is a very gay-friendly city, they're still trying to exist in a red state with a state legislature and a governor that basically wants to wipe them off the face of the earth, which can't be easy. So we think that's a really good cause, and thank you to everybody who has supported it already by ordering stuff. And we got the name of that nonprofit from our friend Trans Gretchen, who is a trans woman who lives in Central Ohio and is a very dear friend of all of ours. And hopefully we get this immunity decision this week, and then we'll get some idea of where we're going from here. And I lost my train of thought. You know, I do have a little bit of COVID brain going on right now. Anyway, thanks everybody for listening. My brother Falcon and I are going to live stream on TikTok tomorrow night for the debate. And whatever happens with that, man, who knows? I have no idea. But hope everybody's doing well. Stay safe for the rest of the week. And I'll see you guys soon. All right. Thanks for listening. Take care.